So this is a heritage interview with two longtime residents of the Bow Valley and of Seebe. It's Mary Smith. That's your full name, right?
Yeah, well, Mary Marjorie Smith.
Okay. And
Robert Neville Smith.
Robert Neville Smith. Welcome. Can you start by giving some details? Your date of birth?
I was born in Banff in 1926 and lived all my early years at Lake Minnewanka until I was about 13, 14.
Okay, and can you give us your birth?
I was born in January 1924 in Winnipeg, actually, but my parents brought me west to Alberta when I was about 6 or 8 months old. I grew up first at Edgerton, and then we moved to Olds, where my dad was on staff at the School of Agriculture. And I spent all my school years in Olds.
Yeah. Good. And Robert, can you tell me something about, I should say Bob, can you tell me something about Lake Minnewanka and how it was at that time?
Well, it was approximately 60 feet lower in elevation than it is now when the lake is full. And our houses were on a part of the lake called Cascade Bay. And people find it very hard to picture now because there was a big peninsula that came out into the lake that enclosed, and it came into a very narrow passage between Cascade Bay and the main lake. And the Cascade River came into the bay, and before the lake was raised in 1912, there had been a creek called Devil's Creek that came from Lake Minnewanka and joined the Cascade River just above Devil's Canyon. And Devil's Canyon is where they built a dam. Calgary Power built a dam in 1912 that raised the lake about 12 or 15 feet. And that's what formed this Cascade Bay where we lived.
Okay.
And the main resort, Minnewanka Resort, was around on the other side of that peninsula on the main lake.
Oh, I see. So that's interesting. Did you go to school in Minnewanka?
No, there was no school there, and Bankhead had been closed in 1924 when my dad came to build the power plant at Minnewanka. When they built the 1912 dam, they put a provision for a penstock to a possible future powerhouse.
Right.
And that was what was utilized for the powerhouse my dad built, which is still standing, and the Parks is talking about making it into an interpretive center now. They talked about that in 1990 as well.
Now back to the school days.
So that wasn't called, the company wasn't called TransAlta at the time, was it?
It was called Calgary Power.
Calgary Power.
Calgary Power Limited, yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until the, I guess around 1980 that it became
Right.
TransAlta.
Right. Now, was that company supplying power to Banff, or?
Well, the one at Lake Minnewanka was owned by the Parks, by the government,
Oh, I see.
Canadian government.
Okay.
And it was built because of Bankhead being shut down.
Right.
There used to be a thermal plant, coal-powered plant at Bankhead that provided Banff with power as well as the town of Bankhead. And of course, Banff went into panic mode when Bankhead announced it was closing.
Yeah.
So that's why the big panic on to build a little hydro plant at Minnewanka, which was why my dad came there, was to build that.
Right.
And he liked it so well he stayed. So
was the community and Minnewanka, was there lots of families, or
Well, it was strictly a summer community
right?
as far as the resort side went, and just two married couples, my folks and one of the operators, in two of the houses there, and the third one had a bachelor living in it, and the spare rooms there were used for relief staff.
Oh, I see.
And so that was all just the three little houses at Cascade Bay.
Was there anything that stands out for you in terms of the life of a young man or a child in Minnewanka?
Yes, it was quite isolated. I mean, even after I started school, I was home in the evenings and weekends and so on. And while I did occasionally have friends out from Banff, and sometimes I'd stay in Banff with friends, but it was certainly, until I started school, it was a very isolated early childhood. And as a result, I got interested in all sorts of things that I may not have been if I'd grown up in town, you know.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of that?
Well, I was curious about natural stuff.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of interest in those days in you know, we didn't have a lot of nature books and so on.
Right.
They existed, but they were expensive and very few and far between.
Right.
For instance, there was Mrs. Schaefer's books and so on.
Mary Schaefer.
Mary Schaefer.
Yeah.
And Julia Henshaw had an excellent botany book out, mostly concentrating on the Selkirks rather than the Rockies,
Right.
although there's a lot in common. And so that's the way it was, and I didn't know what anything was and had no reference to it. And my mother had grown up in Manitoba and holidayed at what was then Port Arthur, where Thunder Bay is now. And so she was naming things that were similar to plants down there.
Oh, right.
For instance, our kinnikinick, she referred to as trailing arbutus and things like that. So I was grown up and living in Seebe before I started to working in Seebe before I started to find out what some of these things were.
Yeah. Did you encounter wildlife in the Minnewanka area?
Oh, we had lots of it. We had deer that used to come to the house for nibblings, which there was no regulation about feeding the wildlife then. We didn't know it was bad for them. And we had lots of birds, chickadees and jays, that, gray jays that came particularly, and flying squirrels. And then we had bears, and most of the bears were they respected us and we respected them, but every once in a while there'd be a bad one.
Yeah.
And there was one, I think there's something wrong with it because it came to the house and was walking around the house with trying to get in and drooling and whatnot, and we had to phone the wardens to come out and shoot it. And because we were absolutely trapped in the house, you know.
Oh, you were trapped in the house?
Well, yeah, we were in the house and the bear was around and around trying to get in.
Interesting.
Yeah. And another time, a smaller black bear, half, you know, 2/3 grown, I guess, was trying to get into, we kept chickens, and was trying to get into the chicken yard. And we often had bears trying to do that. We used to just yell at them and chase them away. Mother went up the hill with a broom to swat the bear, and the bear took after her. I looked out the kitchen door. I just put on my boots to go out, and here was Mother running down the hill with the bear after her, and she came tearing in the kitchen door, and I slammed the door as she came in. and so that taught us a lesson that it was best to take other means to scare the bears away than just going out and swatting them with a broom.
That's interesting. That must have left quite an impression.
Yes, it made a great impression on me.
Now, did you, as far as school goes, did you catch a bus to school, or did you?
Oh no. What usually happened was, well, originally I had to be driven into school and picked up.
Right.
And it was 7 miles in. And but when I got bigger, I'd ride my bike one way, ride it in the morning. Either my dad or my mother used to have to come into town almost every day anyway. My dad on government business, or Mother for shopping and so on. So I'd ride my bike in the morning and leave it at a friend's house overnight, and they'd drive me home and drive me in the next morning, and then I'd ride my bike home that night. And that was more or less the routine.
That's quite a ways. That must be, what, 6 miles?
7 miles.
7 miles, yeah. Huh.
And anyway...
in the winter, the roads...
Yes, very often the road was closed in the winter. Banff only had one snowplow, which wasn't a snowplow, it was a road grader. And of course the Minnewanka road was about the last thing that got tended to.
So how did you?
So Mother and I would, if it was a bad winter, we'd move into town and rent a suite or something in town for maybe January and February. And so that was the routine. It didn't happen every winter, but we got snowed in at Christmas time one time, and it looked as though we weren't going to get our turkey or our Christmas mail or anything. We had perfect communications by telephone, but that was it. And the day before Christmas, I was out building a snow fort or something out at the front of the house, and I heard sleigh bells.
Sleigh bells.
And I guess I was about 6 or 7 at the time, and I didn't believe in Santa anymore, but it was a very strange feeling. and over the hill came Ike Mills with his dog team.
Oh, yeah.
And he had all our Christmas mail and our groceries and everything on.
Yeah. So it was like a Santa Claus.
So it was just like Santa Claus. And the picture of Ike Mills as Santa Claus makes all the old-timers in Banff really hoot, because he was a real rough old character.
Yeah. I know the name is legendary in the Banff area.
Yeah, right.
To give you an idea, he married a woman who was a very fine cellist who used to come and play at the Banff Springs.
Right.
She was from down east somewhere. And how she happened to marry Ike Mills, I have no idea, because I can't imagine they had anything in common. But he got irritated with her playing her cello one night and smashed it. You know, that's the kind of guy he was, not very nice.
That's awful. So then you, maybe I should transition here to Mary. You grew up in Olds then,
yes.
Right? Yeah. And
where I met Bob was that I worked in Banff a couple of summers when I was going to college.
At the Banff Springs?
No, on cash at Gus Baracus's cafe, the Banff Cafe.
Yeah.
It's where Mono's sports store is now. And Gus's son, Andrew, was home from university
Right.
for the summer and came in and did the books and so on for his dad while he was there. And one day he said, if a tall redhead comes in looking for me, send him out to the office. It's my pal Smitty. So we met over the cash register at the Banff Cafe.
And we were going, why I was coming to see Andrew was because we were planning to getting a bunch together and climbing Sulphur Mountain. There was no gondola lift then.
Yeah.
We were going to climb up in order to get to the top for the sunrise.
Oh.
And we talked Mary into coming with us. So that was our first date.
The group date.
A group date, yes.
A group date.
In the dark.
In the dark, starting out from Banff at 11 o'clock.
Well, I got off shift at 11.
Yeah.
If you take the gondola now, you can see the trail. It's still there.
Yes, zigzags down below.
Is that the zigzag trail that goes up? Yeah,
You can still do it.
my daughters used to do their exercise going up there.
Yeah. And so we did, and the sun came up, and it was the blandest sunrise you ever saw. Totally clear blue sky. So no color, you know.
Oh, I see.
And so we did it again the next year. And same thing happened.
No better results.
No better. So,
I guess we didn't listen to weather forecasts.
no, we didn't listen to weather forecasts.
Did you have the photography hobby then already?
Not really.
No.
No.
We do have some frigid-looking
Yeah,
photographs
we've got
taken up there.
pictures of the gang all sitting around the old observatory there, the
Right.
cosmic ray station.
Right.
And we all look cold.
What month of the year was it?
Pardon?
In
What
July.
month of the year
Oh,
was
it
it?
would have been
In July, probably.
midsummer,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you had your first date, and I guess eventually that turned into a second date.
Yeah, and several more, and it's a wonder that Mary stayed with me, because one date was going up Sulphur Mountain in the moonlight, or Tunnel Mountain in the moonlight, and I knew a trail that went down the back, like toward the campground
Oh,
from
yeah.
the top. But when we got over on that side, it was dark. The moon wasn't shining over there.
Yeah.
And so we were feeling our way down the mountain along the edge of a cliff and so on in the dark.
It's a little risky.
I used to say that if one mountain goat had been over a trail before, it was a trail to Bob.
But anyhow, we were pretty tired when we got back down to town, and there was a cafe called the White Owl Cafe. It should have been called the Night Owl Cafe because it was the only one in Banff that stayed open all night.
Okay.
And so we went there for coffee. And everybody gave us a very strange look when we came in. And they were staring at Mary, and I looked at her, and she had spruce twigs and grass and everything in her hair.
You can
Probably.
guess what they were
You
thinking.
can guess what
Probably
they...
set the tongues wagging.
Lots of fun, though.
So, when did you get married?
In 1953.
Because, as I say, I was first at Olds College. I took the course there after growing up as a staff kid.
Right.
I was going into home economics,
No.
and then I
At
did
the Olds.
at the Olds. It was
Yeah.
in those years they had two courses: agriculture and home economics,
Right.
and it was called the Olds School of Agriculture.
Yeah.
So that I was going into home economics, with a view to teaching.
Right.
I had taken my teacher training under a War Emergency Act and
Right.
decided I'd better
Okay.
upgrade my standards.
Mhm.
So I did a year at U of A. There was no Calgary University then. And I ran out of money. There were no student loans then,
That's right.
so I had to go back to teaching. And one day some of my friends at the university came in. They said, "Found a job for you, Mary." I was apparently often talking about wanting to go north
Yeah.
because I had grown up on stories of the north. At Olds, at the college, the chap who was the bookkeeper and accountant had been in the Yukon during the Yukon Gold Rush.
Oh,
98.
that's interesting.
And he used to gather students around of a Sunday evening and tell stories of the north.
Yeah.
And then a woman from Olds, who was a teacher, refused to join the Alberta Teachers Association when it formed,
Yeah.
and so she couldn't get a job in Alberta.
Yeah.
So she went up to Fort Fitzgerald,
Yeah, I know where that is.
and it was so far away the Alberta Teachers Association didn't realize it was still in Alberta, I guess. And she'd come back in the summer and talk about life up there. And then eventually she married and moved up to Yellowknife
Yeah.
and started the first non-sectarian school there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd had these stories and always was interested in the north. So this job that had been posted at the Faculty of Education was for a teacher for Port Radium in the Northwest Territories.
North Saskatchewan. Oh, is it Northwest Territories?
Yeah, it's on the southeast shore of Great Bear Lake.
Yeah.
And it was the originally a radium mine.
That's way up north.
Well, it's 28 miles south of the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
It was discovered in 1935
Yeah.
by Gilbert Labine, and they were taking radium
Yeah.
out of the ore, which was being used for medicinal purposes.
Right.
But with the coming of the war, they lost all those buyers in
Yeah.
Europe and so on. So they just closed the mine and walked away. And through a very strange series of questions and inquiries, it was discovered that somebody was wanting to buy the tailings at Port Hope, where the ore had been refined. And the Canadian government got suspicious and looked into it and realized that there was uranium in that ore also. So they called Labine back in and said, "Open that mine, it doesn't matter what it costs, get it going again."
Yeah.
We're not selling these tailings because it turned out this was coming originally from Europe, the
Oh, yeah.
quarry. So they went back in, and because it was right on the lake shore, it was always flooding. So they knew it had flooded when they left. They went in and found about 12 or 14 feet of ice in the shafts, threw in some pumps and pumped it out, and they were back in business in very short order. So they built up a community there, and they had a one-room school. So I went up,
That was your niche.
I went over to the office in Edmonton, and they'd had a number of applications, but mostly from people who were just graduating.
Yeah.
And so when they found out about my wartime experience in ungraded classrooms and so on, I
Yeah.
got the job. And so I went up there and taught for 2 years, was offered a job doing recreation work in St. Catharines, Ontario, at the hospital there. Went down, all they wanted was a policeman for the hospital, or for the nurses' residence.
Yeah.
And was coming back, intending to go back to university, and my mom sent me an ad Port Radium was advertising for a teacher again. So I wired my application, and when I got home, found I had a job. I wasn't going
In Port Radium again.
back in Port Radium.
Yeah.
So I taught another 2 years, and then through the years we had written numerous letters, of course.
You stayed in touch.
We stayed in touch. And so in 1953 we got married.
Yeah. By that time, was Seebe established by that time?
Now, Seebe was started in actually in 1909
Okay.
when they began to survey for the power plants there. And Horseshoe plant was finished in 1911, in 1911, and the Kananaskis plant in 1913, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And so it was actually, originally they wanted to get power to the cement plant at Exshaw.
Right.
But they also were supplying power to Calgary eventually. And then during the war, the government let them raise Lake Minnewanka to get more power out of it,
Yeah.
which would never happen in the park now.
No.
But anybody that had, when the environmentalists screamed then, they said, "You're fifth columnists, you're Nazis, you're..."
Yeah. Right.
So they really squelched them. And anyway, my dad stayed on at the new Cascade plant. And he
Which is the one you see by the highway, is that it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So I still had the power plant connection, and in the meantime, I was in Air Cadets in Banff, and then Dad insisted that I get a year of college before I went to joined up to anything. So while I was at Mount Royal in Calgary, at the old Mount Royal, which was right across the street from Mawata Armories,
That's right.
I joined the Reserve Army there.
Okay.
And well, that wasn't nearly as interesting as the Air Cadets, but then when we should have been concentrating on our Easter exams, finals, a whole bunch of us thought maybe the Navy was the most interesting of all. Went up to Tecumseh and all joined the Navy.
Oh.
And so while I was waiting for my Navy call, Dad heard that they needed people at Seebe, floormen and so on. So I went down there just to tide me over for a few weeks. And then VE Day came and they delayed all our call-ups. So I stayed on at Seebe. And then VJ Day came and that finished it. So that was my career in the Navy.
You never did get on the salt water, or did
No.
you? No.
No. And it's like Mary's brother who joined the Air Force and never got never got overseas.
Yes, he got all the way overseas to Newfoundland
Yeah.
because it was not part of Canada yet.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
He was put in as an instructor.
He was agitating to get overseas, and that's where they put him.
So meanwhile, now you were building your career with with Calgary Power.
With Calgary Power, yeah.
Yeah.
And I had never intended to stay in Seebe, but by that time I was getting to like it.
Yeah. And you were a young 20-something, or?
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah,
late 20.
yeah, I was 19 when I started working at Seebe.
Oh.
Yeah.
And
Was Seebe a reasonable community at that time already? Or?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know, they were counting the people over at Kananaskis Ranch and so on. There were about 150 people.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Forestry and all the, as far as the people that came there to get their mail and groceries, it was about 150.
And you had various community facilities, did you?
Oh yeah, there was a one-room school, but there was a community hall.
Right.
Part of the building. And there were regular dances. We had our own dance band there and everything. So,
right.
We had a
and
very
they were good.
very good community club
Yeah.
that organized these dances and
Yeah.
other activities and so on.
Did you have interaction with other communities, Exshaw or?
A certain amount with Exshaw, especially after they built the one rink of artificial ice in Seebe.
Yeah.
A lot of Exshaw people used to come down to curl.
Some people said it was the best ice in Alberta.
Yeah, and I think they were right.
Yeah. So did you both curl?
Yeah.
Yes.
I gave it up after a while because I always seemed to get the late draw when I was on night shift, which meant that you curled in the evening and went to work after you were thoroughly chilled, you know. And finally got a little tired of this. So I was never a good not a really good curler.
Right.
I think Mary stuck with it longer than I did.
Well, I had learned to curl up in Port Radium because we had 2 sheets of ice
Yeah.
and curled on natural ice
I'll
from
bet.
about the 1st of November until end of
Yeah.
April. And we
Yeah.
were heartily sick of it by that time. But in Seebe, one time we women played like one woman on a team.
Yeah.
And then we used to have a ladies group that played in the afternoons.
Right.
But once our children started arriving, we had to give that up because everybody was curling and not able to babysit.
How many children did you have?
We have 2 daughters,
2 daughters.
Marjorie Gibney, who lives here in Canmore, and Shirley Jackson, who lives out in
Oh, yeah.
Half Moon Bay,
Yeah.
BC. And the other people were
I can
Also-
imagine. I can imagine that life for young children in Seebe must have been pretty idyllic.
It was.
Yeah.
And you never worried about them out playing because if they were in your yard, you watched everybody,
Yeah.
and if they were in somebody else's,
Yeah.
we bought a trampoline one year. I used to do some substitute teaching in Exshaw,
Right.
and I used my money to buy a trampoline. So from then on, we had most of the kids in Seebe in the Smith's yard. But it was a really wonderful place for them to grow up.
And now that existing school building, which is it torn down now?
Yeah.
You know?
That school building was the one that your kids went to school in, was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Marjorie up to
Great.
grade 8, I think.
Yeah. About that. I can't.
You know, and then she went to Exshaw for grade 9 and then to Banff
Right.
for high school. And Shirley, I think, just had to grade 6 in Seebe and did her junior high in Exshaw. And by that time, she was deeply into her ballet
Mm-hmm.
classes. So she went into Calgary to Crescent Heights for her high school.
Oh, I see. So she would be living there during the week.
She lived in Calgary with my cousin
Oh, I see.
and
Yeah.
carried on her ballet.
Yeah. Good.
And
What was life like in Seebe? Are there any highlights that stand out?
Well, I think the community spirit, for one thing, it was very more like a great big family, you know.
Yeah.
And everybody cooperated on, took turns hosting the dances and parties and so on. We had really elaborate celebrations for everybody that got married and for wedding anniversaries and all that sort of thing, retirements.
Right.
And
for those parties, those of us who were connected with Control Center, where Bob was working, whichever husband was on shift, the wife babysat the children for people brought their youngsters in sleeping bags and so on, and got them settled, and then went to the party. And if a child woke up and made strange, he just phoned over and got the parent to come and settle them down again.
Great. Yeah. And was access always across that Bailey Bridge that exists there now?
No, when I first went to Seebe, we drove in across the dam.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, and that was not only Seebe access, but the Kananaskis Valley.
Oh.
That's how everybody came, was across the dam and around the gatehouse corner there.
And that meant up to Barrier, where there was the internment camp during the war.
Oh, that's right, prisoners of war.
Yeah. And then there was a huge camp at Ozeda.
Yeah.
And there was a big difference between the Barrier Lake one and the Ozeda camp. They put all the real dyed-in-the-wool Nazi types in the Ozeda one, and the guys that were at Barrier were all just ordinary Joes, carpenters and stonemasons and
Merchant Navy
people and so
mostly.
on. And they were letting them, they weren't just doing work for the forestry, they were being farmed out around the valley doing various work projects. Like they built some of the buildings, they're gone now, but some of the stone buildings at Loader's Lime Plant, when it was right on the highway by the houses at Kananaskis.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And so it was very interesting through the war, I guess, because I was a friend of the Seebe superintendent's son, and used to hear a lot about it. And they were very worried about the Ozeda camp for, you know, if there was ever a break up there, because it was just over the hill from Seebe. And they used to hear the prisoners up there up against the fence in the evenings, all screaming the horse whistle song and all that kind of stuff. So it was a little nervy.
Did you get to know any of the prisoners?
No. No, we knew a lot of the guards.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, the medical officer at Barrier Plant was
my best friend's dad.
Yeah.
Who's dad?
My best friend's dad.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And
he had been a doctor in Olds.
Yeah.
He,
so the camps were closed right after the war?
Yeah, they became forestry.
Yeah.
The ones at Barrier. And the Ozeda one had been mostly tents, and it just disappeared after the war, except for the guard towers.
Was there any breakouts or any issues like that?
No, there never was, but they were missing 3 prisoners when the camp closed.
They were missing?
Yeah.
How many?
3. And they didn't know how they got in the way, or where they'd gone or anything, so everybody was on edge about that. And then one day, from where the dump had been, somebody spotted smoke coming up. Here these guys were holed up in the dump.
Yeah.
Thought nobody would ever look there for them, but
They were recaptured.
they were recaptured, yeah.
Yeah.
Most of them were moved down to a more permanent type of camp.
Yeah.
To
Around Lethbridge or Medicine
Lethbridge or
Hat, I
Medicine
can't
Hat, I
I
remember.
think there was a camp in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, yeah. In Seebe there was a bachelor's quarters, wasn't there?
Yeah, the staff house.
Did you first live there when you...
Yeah, I lived there for 8 years.
There must have been quite an existence in there.
Yeah, it was lots of fun. And we had a very bad reputation among some of the very proper ladies around Seebe, those staff house boys. And
Before the later staff house was built, they used one of the cottage duplexes as the staff house.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the men's bedrooms were on one side, and the cook's suite and the living room and dining room and kitchen on the other. And anyway, where was I?
Bad staff house boys.
Yes, the bad staff house boys. Well, when we moved to the new staff house, we decided we should do something about this to celebrate opening the new staff house and so on. And the first Boxing Day we were in, we decided to have a party for the whole community in the staff house. And we got together and bought a bunch of proper drinking glasses and so on, and all pitched in to buy the booze, and the cooks did a great job of putting up fancy food and everything. And so everybody came. You could tell that some of these prim old ladies came to see what sort of den of iniquity this was. I remember, I probably shouldn't give names, but I remember two of the ladies that had been very critical of the staff house boys. They were offered drinks, and one of them said, "I hear Tom Collins is nice. I'll try a Tom Collins." So she got her Tom Collins, and the other lady asked for a sip and said, "Ooh, that's good. I'll have one of those too." And then a little later, they ordered 2 more Tom Collinses. And they were very happy by the end of the evening. They had a wonderful time.
Yeah.